What prayer actually accomplished?
That was very good. They would have to pay for the buildings too, aren't they? Oh, is it? Okay. Yeah, but they were shocked. Maybe Chris were.
The trust clause has been a punitive clause, but it can be waived.
He's coming on the clouds, kings and kingdoms will
Yeah, some Model Ts and Model A's had to push backwards up the hill. Gravity.
Can you hear the prayers that people pray? Can you see the skies begin to break? When heaven and earth were face to face, oh how the world forever changed. For God is with us. God is with us. All in a moment, all in an instant. The body was broken and it was finished. So let us begin the celebration and the ceremony. There's silence on earth, but the heavens are roaring, telling the story of the coming glory. Can you feel your heart begin to race? Can you see the tide begin to change? With all of our futures rearranged, the world will never be the same. For God is with us. God is with us. For God is with us. God is with us. For God is with us. Dare to imagine,
So where'd you meet Sandra?
dare to believe in
Well, I was at the Mission Society.
true love that gave up.
We
Reason
had
for
the
leaving.
Bible.
Can you feel the hope that's rushing in? Can you hear the song that's echoing? Join with the choir as we sing. This is where love truly begins.
Well, this woman is absolutely fantastic. And there you are, everybody. We are on the air.
You've always wanted to say that, right?
Yeah, I've always wanted to say that. That just makes me feel so good. Yeah. Okay, so let's do something. You started the countdown again.
Good. Sorry, my fault.
Are we on the air then?
Welcome.
Oh, okay. We're on. All right. Before we get started, give you the honors to talk about your mother.
My name is Susan Hoffner, and this is my mother, Dorothy Hoffner. And as of tomorrow, she will be 94 years young.
Shall we sing happy
Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Dorothy. Happy birthday to you. Yeah.
that those that have the most birthdays live the longest? That's why.
Well, now I know why you're still alive. I can't top that one, that's for sure. Well, we're coming into the, I'd like to say the home stretch, but we're not. But we are starting to move into the real meat and potatoes of this thing. You should have just a little outline of what the session is. You also should have two pieces of paper. On one at both sides is maps, and the other side is a timeline. And I'm not going to bother to explain those because in the video, Sandy will explain a lot of that. So you'll have that. And that timeline, keep with you because that's going to help you understand everything as we progress. It's very, very important. I have a few questions though as we start out tonight. Do all you people around here, if you're getting lost, do you stop and get directions?
I've never been lost.
Perry says no. He doesn't get directions.
You always know where you are.
Or you just put it in GPS.
Don't go anywhere without it.
No.
But then let's ask the question: have you ever been lost?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Tell me the story.
Mom and I decided to go up to, where did we go, Massachusetts, to see our friends. And the map that we had was complete, we ended up, I don't know where we ended up. But we finally pulled into a gas station and said, do you know where this is? And she said, yes, it's just right around the corner.
Of course.
It always is. Anybody else get lost that wants to share? No?
In Washington DC.
Oh,
Just kept going around and around.
around,
Driving
yeah.
in Boston during the Big D.
Yes, we did that, didn't we, honey?
Yeah. The Big D. What's the
Big
big?
dig.
Oh, the Big Dig. Okay, there you go.
Roads were closed and
Yeah.
one-ways and
Okay, okay. When it comes to driving and geography, how are you going to describe yourself? If I name a city, can you tell me where it's at? Is that a thing that you can do?
Where?
If I just come up with the name of a city, can you tell me where that city is?
It all depends.
Huh?
It all depends. Where-
Albuquerque?
Lakewood.
New Mexico.
Mexico.
Okay. Boise?
Idaho.
All right. Let me see. Oh, I had one and now I forgot it. That was really, that was
Greenville.
South Carolina.
Oh, there's a Greenville in every state.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Okay.
Bill, I've got one for you.
Okay.
2 egg.
What?
2 eggs.
2 egg.
2 eggs.
Eggs in
It's
Florida.
got to be Florida.
Yes, lick skillet.
Egg Heights.
Lick skillet.
What?
Egg Heights.
Indiana.
Egg guys?
Heights?
Egg Heights.
Egg Heights.
Alaska?
Georgia.
Oh.
Georgia.
GYPT, but they pronounce it Egg Heights.
It's not easy.
Oh, what can I tell you? Peekaboo. Where's Peekaboo?
I know.
Idaho. There you go.
Tie.
All right.
Tai Tai?
Uh,
Hawaii.
Georgia.
Oh.
Toto.
See what you started?
I see that.
How about Paris?
Just above right.
Paris, Texas.
Kentucky, too.
No, the Paris, New York.
Yeah.
Where's Bonito?
Bonito,
Where's Bonito?
Indiana.
Oh.
So is lick skillet.
Where's Onico? Florida.
Okay. I have another question to ask you. Can you name all 7 continents?
Africa, Asia, Australia, Antarctica, Arctica, North America, South America,
One more.
There's another one.
Oceania.
and Europe. That's 8 that I
What?
did.
All right. All right. Do you believe that Canada is up north?
What?
Do you believe that Canada is up north?
Yes.
Okay. And Mexico is south?
Yes.
How'd that happen?
That's where they put them.
That's where God wanted them.
No, that's what Brits decided to call up north, and Mexico decided to call down south. They came from the Spaniards. Okay. What's the most beautiful place you've ever been?
Grand Canyon.
Grand Canyon. Good choice.
Grand Canyon. That's what I-
Another Grand Canyon.
Great Barrier Reef.
Great Barrier Reef. Yeah.
Big trees in California.
Yosemite Park.
Kauai.
Yeah. There's somebody. What have you got?
Kauai.
Kauai. Okay.
Galapagos Island.
Galapagos. Yeah. Iceland. Yes.
Norway.
Yeah.
Beautiful area.
Uh huh.
Lofoten Islands.
The what?
Lofoten.
Lofoten.
Paris was pretty. He didn't mind all the traffic.
I don't know, when I was there, it snowed the day we were out, and snowed the day we left.
Of the places that you've been, what features of one of those locations make it probably one of the most beautiful places you've ever been?
Mountains.
Mountains where?
North Carolina.
North Carolina mountains. Okay. Others?
Wildlife in the Galapagos is,
Uh-huh.
strange and unique. They really don't have a fear of
All
humans.
right, San Diego. Sunset
Oh,
Beach.
yeah, Sunset Beach at San Diego is awesome.
The Garden of the Gods outside
Oh,
Colorado
yes.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Just magnificent.
Uh-huh.
The
Uh-huh.
beauty of that. Oh, my
It
God.
is.
Oh, Faithful's pretty good too. And Jackson Hole.
Zion National Park.
Uh-huh. Sue, what's the name of the waterfall on the border of,
Iguazu.
there you go.
Say that again?
Iguazu. They are the most fabulous waterfalls. You can stand in one spot and see 200 waterfalls. It's just
Where's this at?
magnificent. Between Paraguay and Uruguay
Yeah.
and it's
And Brazil.
An intersection. Yeah, it's South
Some
America.
other
And Brazil. Yeah. It's absolutely fantastic. Okay, that's the easy stuff. Okay? When it comes to places in the Bible, when it comes to those places, do you want to find out where they were or who they are? Do you go look them up? Do you? Okay. How about events? How about events of the Bible? Do you know where they've taken place? Just some of them? A lot of them are a mystery, aren't they?
You know, it says what took place, but not even sure where it is.
Okay. What?
Like the Garden of Eden.
There you go. Well, nobody knows where that was.
Where that was.
That's right.
Tigers and your fruit trees, right?
Yeah, that's what one thought is. All right, so we're going to start tonight with talking about places and people as we lead into the next part of the study of the Old Testament. Cue it up there, Maestro.
We are in session 3 of the Epic of Eden, and you have now crossed part of the Great Barrier. You have conquered the barrier of culture that stands between us and them. And now it's time to take on some of the other aspects of that barrier. And these aspects are going to include the barrier of geography and the barrier of time. Now, not only are we getting past the barrier, but it's also time to start organizing. Remember, I promised you an organized closet? Well, what happens with history and geography when folks study the Old Testament is they are overwhelmed by detail.
Okay, we're gonna start this over. I apologize.
Okay.
Well, that was really good. Any more questions?
Here we go. This one counts.
We are in session 3 of the Epic of Eden, and you have now crossed part of the Great Barrier. You have conquered the barrier of culture that stands between us and them. And now it's time to take on some of the other aspects of that barrier. And these aspects are going to include the barrier of geography and the barrier of time. Now, not only are we getting past the barrier, but it's also time to start organizing. Remember, I promised you an organized closet? Well, what happens with history and geography when folks study the Old Testament is they are overwhelmed by detail. So my job is to take all of this overwhelming detail and distill it down into a few careful categories that you can use and reuse for the rest of your life as a student of the Bible. So that's what I'm up to during this session, and we're going to start off with geography. Now, I know that many people have had bad experiences with geography. Back in 7th, 8th grade, junior high school, they made you learn all those maps and you were traumatized. Well, I don't want to re-traumatize you, so I'm going to start off very gently. So here we are with your first image. This is a mall map of the world. Now, I have many students who are absolutely brilliant who have memorized the maps in the back of their Bible. They can tell you where the tribe of Gad had its inheritance, and they know that Naphtali was one of the northern territories. I find that fairly impressive. But if they were to lift the map of tribal allotments out of the back of their Bible and be required to place it on a map of the world, it wouldn't be pretty. So we're going to start off big and narrow in. And again, we're going to start off gently. So when I speak of a mall map and you take a look at this image, why do I call it a mall map? Well, I am one of those rare female human beings who despises the mall. Deep, visceral hatred of the mall. Don't want to go there, overwhelmed when I get there. So when I go, I need a little map to help me. And so I look for the major entryways where they have those cool little, pedestal maps that say you are here, and Sears, where you have to go return the Land's End clearance items that you bought for your children online, is over here. And I look for that map, and that's how I navigate. So that's what you're looking at, is your map of the world. And find yourself on the map. You are here. They were there. And the little green slug that you're looking at is where all of biblical history happened. And that little green slug is much more affectionately known as the Fertile Crescent. So we're going to focus in. This next image is the Fertile Crescent. And I'm going to test your intellectual capacity here as you look at this screen. This area, this region of the world was called the Fertile Crescent because it was
Fertile.
And shaped like a
Crescent.
Oh, you all are brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So this region, again, is where all of biblical history happened. Everything that takes place from Genesis through David to Joseph and back again, it all takes place in this region known as the Fertile Crescent. Now, why was it fertile? This region of the world is actually known for being desert and arid and inhabitable, but what transforms wilderness and desert into agricultural land and pasturage is water. And so we're interested in the 4 great river systems that shaped this region of the world. The first one is the Tigris River. The second is the Euphrates River. The third is the Jordan. And the fourth is the Nile. Now, these river systems transformed arid territory into habitable land, so people came and inhabited it. And when they did, they built their civilizations and their cities and the great story of which we are a part. So again, when folks look at geography and they start reading all of those places in the biblical text, their eyes glaze over, they get totally lost in the details. I'm going to distill this down to a few regions that you can hang on to that will shape the story for you. So the way I'm going to do this is we're going to take this great region and we're going to speak of 3 areas. The first area is Mesopotamia. I love that word. Don't you love that word? It's just fun to say. Would you like to say it with me? Are you ready? Mesopotamia. Isn't that fun? It's like spatula or macadamia nut. Do you remember that skit? Have you seen that skit? Okay, so one more time. Mesopotamia. Great. It means the land between the 2 rivers. Meso means between, potamus means river. Hippopotamus means river horse. So you can hear potamos in there. All right, Mesopotamia is where the Bible is birthed. It's where the story begins. This is the first great region. The second one is the land of Egypt. Not as much fun to say, but an important region all the same. So Egypt is the next great area. What is interesting about these 2 regions is this is where civilization truly was born. If we were doing a Western Civ class or a world history class, I would spend all of my time in Mesopotamia and Egypt. These guys developed urban centers, mathematics, science, medicine, astrology, all of this stuff, astronomy, not astrology, all of this stuff before Abraham was a twinkle in his daddy's eye. These are the superpowers. These are the great civilizations. This is where the pyramids are. These are the people who developed writing. Our people, on the other hand, are kind of East kneecap hillbillies, all right? But we love them. And it is where our story begins. So these 2 regions are critical. They have all the wealth, they have all the resources, they have the great river systems, but in between them lies a critical land bridge. A land bridge that without it, these 2 great civilizations could never have communicated. And that region is where these arrows fall on your map. And this region is known as either Canaan, Israel, or Palestine. They're all the same place. The only distinction is that when the Canaanites lived there, they called it Canaan. When the Israelites lived there, they called it Israel. And when the Babylonians were unable to decipher the word Philistine, it was renamed Palestine. Don't you love that the land is actually named for the Philistines? It just seems like an historical irony to me. But all three of those names indicate the same place. I'll be using all three names throughout the series. Canaan is its oldest name, Israel is the next, and then Palestine. What's critical to us is the role of this land bridge, because the land bridge itself made it possible for Egypt and Mesopotamia to interact. And how would they interact? They would interact by trade, for sure, but they would also interact by means of military assault and defense. What this region became was the great toll road of the ancient Near East, which means that our heroes were exposed to every innovation of the age and all sorts of wealth that came with those innovations. That's great, but they were also the land bridge between the two greatest armies on the planet. And so our guys became the buffer zone between the superpowers. In other words, Canaan, Israel, Palestine had the snot beaten out of them on a regular basis, as first Egypt claimed them as a buffer zone against Mesopotamia, and then Mesopotamia claimed them as a buffer zone against Egypt. But at this critical crossroads is where God chose to manifest himself in real space and time to real people and to begin to tell the story. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at this map and we're going to tell the story and walk you through your great narrative in real space. So just kick back and relax and take a look at your screen. The story begins, of course, in the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden is described as a place in the east. So who's telling this story? Someone who lives to the west of Mesopotamia, right? A great garden in the east in which a cosmic river flowed that broke into 4 headwaters. And those 4 headwaters are named the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Pishon, and the Gihon. Well, you know about the Tigris and the Euphrates. You've seen them on the map. The Pishon is probably an extinct river that flowed through Saudi Arabia, and we'll get back to the Gihon. But all that to say that the biblical authors intend for you to see Eden in Mesopotamia. The next great story is going to be the story of Noah's Ark. And of course, Noah's Ark also takes place in the floodplain that happens in Mesopotamia. And the story of the great ark and the animals that are gathered. And here, God looks down at the race of humanity and says, even though the Adamic race has failed at every possible front, I'm not going to give up on the children of Adam. So he washes the world clean, he rescues a family and all of the creatures that had first populated Eden. They're rescued by means of an enormous boat which rides out the storm, and when it lands on Mount Ararat, repopulates the planet. This also happens in Mesopotamia. And then as the population grows and struggles with their new identity as a fallen race, we read about the Tower of Babel and how all humanity decided that they were going to try to conquer heaven. And God said, at this juncture, I think it would be wisest for me to confuse their languages and scatter them across the planet such that I can create some time and space for a redemptive plan. And so the nations scatter. We do not leave Mesopotamia, though, with the story of redemption until a certain man who, as far as we know, was born in Ur of the Chaldees, and his name is Abram. And of course, he is called out of Ur of the Chaldees, which, by the way, is a very real place. It's a real city. It is known for the resuscitation of ancient Sumerian culture. In fact, there's an entire era of history named after Ur, the Ur III period. And this civilization experiences collapse in just about 2000 BC, which also happens to be the opening of the Middle Bronze period, which is also where most scholars would place Abraham historically. So all that to say, these are not made-up places. But it's in Ur that Abraham receives his call, and how does he travel? He travels north, because how else could he travel? He can't cut across the desert unless he wants to die. So he follows the ancient highways up to a city that you've also heard of, the city of Haran. Also not a make-believe place. A center of Amorite worship. In the 3rd and 2nd millennia, the god Sin was worshipped there, and Amorite nomadic tribes had named it as a sacred center for their religious activity. This is where Abram's family first travels, and then he hears the call again and heads south into the land bridge that is Canaan. He will spend his entire life moving north and south between those two red brackets, from Dan to Beersheba, running along the central hill country as a nomadic herdsman, following seasonal pasturage. If you read the Bible casually, you might think that Abram is just wandering around, that he's lost. He's not wandering. What he is a very wealthy pastoralist who owns enormous flocks of sheep and goats, and he's following the pasturage. He's going north when rain is slight, and he's going south when rain is good, and moving his flocks in order to feed them and care for them. This is where the patriarchs will live out their lives, right here in the land bridge, in the land of Canaan. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12. This is their area of the world, until the youngest, Joseph, who we know well, irritates the snot out of his brothers, and they finally decide that it is time to get rid of the little brat. And so on the northern reaches of that little Levantine division up near Dothan, a very important east-west pass between the ancient highways that come out of Mesopotamia and the major highway that heads down into Egypt, Joseph is sold to a caravan. What's a caravan doing there? It's going to Egypt. It's going to Egypt to sell its goods and make money. And so Joseph is sold to the caravaneers, brought down to Egypt, and sold as a domestic servant in Potiphar's house. You know how the story continues, that although Joseph, there's Dothan on your map, by the way, he heads south into Egypt, and when he reaches Egypt, he will eventually settle his family in the land of Goshen. Goshen is what the Bible calls the Eastern Nile Delta. So that when Jacob comes down after Joseph is finally rediscovered, the 70 souls and all that come down into Egypt, Pharaoh commands Joseph to settle them in Goshen, where the pastoralists are. And if we had weeks and weeks together, I would talk to you about this region of Egypt and how there's Semitic settlement all throughout the Eastern Nile Delta in the era that we think the patriarchs date to. So in other words, Jacob and his kin are settling where the other Semites already are. Just like when the Chinese immigrated, they moved to Chinatown. When the Greeks immigrated, they moved to Lowell, Massachusetts. You might not have known that. And when the Cubans immigrate, they go to Miami and they find their relatives. This is how people immigrate. And so our fellows settle in the Eastern Nile Delta. At first they are welcome guests, but eventually they become personas non grata. And they are marginalized, pressed to the outer edges of the society, and eventually are enslaved as a forced labor community within Egypt. And there they stay until Yahweh remembers his covenant with Abraham. He hears the cry of his people and he sends a deliverer. That deliverer's name, of course, is Moses. He challenges Pharaoh on his own turf. He proves to him that Yahweh is the Lord of the cosmos by turning Pharaoh's world upside down, and he marches the Israelites out of the Eastern Nile Delta, through the eastern fortifications of Egypt, down to Sinai. At Sinai, they will camp for 1 year, and they will be transformed into the people of God. God will offer him their covenant. They will embrace it. They will hear the law. And at the 1 year mark, God will say, you've circled this mountain long enough. It's time to head north. And so under Moses' leadership, they will head north. They will come to the southern boundary of the promised land, and Moses will send in the 12 tribes. But 10 of them will look at those big Canaanites and say, oh no, God can't conquer Canaanites. And God will say, I just defeated Egypt. I just defeated Pharaoh. Were you there when I parted the Red Sea? Are your sandals still wet from walking through the ground level under the ocean? But they're like, oh no. And so the 10 spies give a bad report, and Israel is sent back into the wilderness. 40 years of wandering later, they finally get the call. After the generation has been purged, they come up through the Transjordanian area on the King's Highway, which is still there to this day. And finally, standing on the plains of Moab, Moses says, I am done. I resign. You can have this church. Thank you very much. It's been a good ride. Here's my associate. He is a young and handsome man. He will take over. I'm retiring. And so Joshua takes over. They head into the promised land, taking Jericho first, which happens to be right over the Jordan River from the plains of Moab. And our guys settle in the promised land. The first reality, the first manifestation of their settlement is the 12 tribes. And as you look at your screen, what you see is a map of that 12 tribe of settlement. All of our guys receive their patrimony, their parcel of land, and all the tribes move to their assigned area. They live as an independent, decentralized government for years. But finally, the corruption of the society is so great that it seems the only possible solution is a king. And so David is called, he becomes the king of Israel, he defines the territories of the kingdom, and for the first time in Israel's experience, from the arm of the Euphrates to the Wadi of Egypt, Israel owns its own land. And this is your story by means of geography. The last chapter of this story is when the kingdom divides north and south. We wind up with a civil war, northern kingdom versus southern kingdom, until God finally brings the covenant curse. The northern kingdom is sent off into exile because they failed to keep the covenant, and they head back to Assyria, and the southern kingdom is captured and heads back to Babylon. So that's your story. There's the big picture. Let's break it down to our 3 regions one more time. We got 3 regions we got to know, right? The first one is Mesopotamia. The second one is Egypt. And the third one is Canaan, Israel, Palestine. We're going to do that one more time. Okay, your first region is Mesopotamia. Your second one is Egypt. And your third is Canaan, Israel, Palestine. Okay, you've got geography. Let's take a look at real time, and this one will go quicker. All right, real time. Again, so many acquisitions in your closet, so much data that you've packed into your brain from 3rd grade Sunday school all the way forward. How in the world are you ever going to use this? What I find over and over again with the folks I train, that they're afraid to preach the Old Testament because it's too complicated. How in the world am I going to get all those dates and people together? Well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take all those dates and those people, and we're going to start organizing your closet. So what you're looking at right now is Sandy Richter's handy dandy timeline. I designed it, I've edited it, it's yours, reproduce it at will. This timeline tracks the story of Israel. Actually, it tracks the story of redemption from Eden all the way to the New Jerusalem. It tells the entire biblical story from beginning to end. And so we're going to start off here in this story with Eden, just as we did in geography. And Eden is this first icon, the tree on the upper left-hand corner. Now notice, by the way, that I have no dates under Eden. I have question marks. And the reason for that is we can't date Eden. Now, there are a lot of folks out there who think they can date Eden, and they do it by means of work that was done by Bishop Ussher in the 16th century. Now, Bishop Ussher was a fine scholar and a fine churchman, but the way he came up with his date for Eden, for the creation of this planet, was by means of adding up the genealogical ages in Genesis. And once he added up those ages, and he complemented them by the parts of the Bible that we are clear on actual dating of the events, and did the comparative work aligning those dates, he came up with 4004 BC. In fact, he actually came up with the exact date of creation in October of 4004 BC. Now again, Ussher was a fine scholar and a fine man, but what he did not know is that genealogies are never intended to be exhaustive. They are like filing folders for people. And so people are placed in genealogies in different ways and fashions. In fact, if you were to compare the genealogies of Matthew chapter 1, for example, and the Gospel of Luke, you would find that in Matthew, there are 14 generations that divide Abraham from David, David to the exile, and the exile to the Christ. And the biblical writer makes a very big point of the fact that there are 14 generations. Well, if you go to the genealogy of Luke, you will find that Luke divides David from the exile and the exile to Jesus by 21 generations. So is Luke a bad historian, or is Matthew a bad historian? Or is Luke a liar and Matthew telling the truth, or is Matthew lying and Luke telling the truth? Folks, the news is that what Bishop Ussher could not know is that genealogies are very fluid and rarely complete. The idea is that you emphasize the characters that are critical to your story and you sort of sidelines the ones who aren't. So in Genesis, the genealogies run on a 10-generational scheme to highlight the critical characters. And so Adam and Noah get that 10th spot in order to communicate how important they are. All that to say, we can't date creation, not by the Bible, to 4004 BC. We can't be sure exactly when it occurred. It occurred at the beginning of all things, and it is the foundation of our faith. But exactly when, we're going to have to leave that to science to figure out. All right, so Eden cannot be dated, but this is our first great event. Here, God creates humanity. He places him in the garden with everything that humanity could ever ask for, and promises him unending relationship if humanity will simply obey. As you know, humanity chooses not to obey and rebels instead and says, no, I would prefer to make my own world, thank you very much. And God says, have at it. And so the fall occurs. The Adamic race develops and declines and becomes corrupt until we come to the second great benchmark, the story of Noah, where God cleanses the planet and reinstitutes relationship with one family, one man, Noah. Noah's family moves forward and develops and expands until in Genesis 11 we are introduced to one descendant of Noah, a fine man named Abraham. Abraham hears the promise, hears the call, leaves his Beit Av, his father's house, and heads off into a land not known. Whenever I hear that story of Abraham, I think about the fact that when I was 18, and God would call and say, go and leave everything and go somewhere you've never seen before, my whole response would be, yes, yes, yes. But at 45, not so much, not so much. But Abraham, he's in that category. What he's being called to leave is a house that's paid for, a 401k that's full to bursting, relationships and networks and a job that he's worked for 25, 30 years, and yet he goes. And this is the great call. So Abraham and the patriarchs are the next big juncture on our timeline, and notice that I've started adding dates. And the dates here are approximate, somewhere around 2000. Now don't be thinking that Abraham stepped out of Ur of the Chaldees on October 27th, 2000 BC. It's not nearly that specific, but somewhere in that era is a great historical milieu for the patriarchs. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Joseph sailed down into Egypt, and then the great deliverance by Moses. The great deliverance by Moses is going to be our fourth benchmark, when somewhere around 1400, 1300 BCE, the Israelites step out of Egypt into their new life. As we follow the story along, we go through the era of the judges and the decentralized tribal government until at last Israel is called into the monarchy. First Saul, then David, then Solomon. These are the kings of the united monarchy, and that's our next great benchmark, is David. But many people don't realize that civil war actually occurred right after Solomon's death. Israel was a united monarchy only for 3 short reigns, Saul, David, and Solomon. And then Solomon's son Rehoboam, a little indulged, probably a little spoiled, didn't know what the average person was living with, put so much pressure on the tribes, that the northern tribes said, to heck with it, we are done with you southerners. And the northern tribes headed north and the southern tribes headed south, never to reunite again. And so the divided monarchy begins. So as you look at your timeline, this juncture where the crown is the juncture where the north and the south divide. The first king of the northern kingdom is a God-ordained king. His name is Jeroboam, and he is given the northern kingdom, but he's given it under the condition that he will be faithful to the covenant that God established with his people. Well, the northern tribes are not faithful. They are syncretists, in other words, blending of their religion with Baalism from the very beginning. And so by 722 BC, Yahweh says, I've had it. There's nothing more I can do. I've disciplined you in every possible way. The covenant curse is enacted, and the northern kingdom is dragged off into exile. Thus ends the northern kingdom. In fact, you've heard of the 10 lost tribes? These are them. They are the 10 lost tribes. They never come home again. They disappear into the Assyrian hinterland. They're absorbed. We never see them on the pages of history again. The southern kingdom, on the other hand, starts with Rehoboam I, and everything you know about Israelite religion actually happens in the south. Jerusalem, the temple, most of the writing of the Bible, the priesthood, all of these things are happening in the south. And here the Davidic kings will rule. And so all of David's sons live or reign upon the thrones of the southern kingdom. But two, the southern kingdom can't keep faith. They have a few high points, Hezekiah's reform, Josiah's reform, but outside of that, it's a mixed bag. And so by the time we get to 586 BC, Yahweh says, I've had it, that's enough. I've done everything I can. Isaiah chapter 1, I've disciplined you from head to foot. I've beaten you. I've sent my prophets. I've sent famine. You will not listen. You will not hear. And so the southern kingdom is dragged off into exile as well. The difference is that the southern kingdom is the remnant. You might have thought that was a New Testament word. It's an Old Testament word. And the remnant stays faithful in exile. And in 538 BC, because of the Edict of Cyrus, an international event that Israel had no part in causing, but Yahweh uses as an instrument of his plan, Cyrus, the king of Persia, says to the Jews, if you want to go home, you can. And he writes a letter, and he gives them back their stuff, and he says, go home. And the remnant, a tenth of those who'd gone into exile, said, we're going home. And so with the promise of a Messiah resounding in their hearts, they go home. And they rebuild the temple, and they rebuild Jerusalem, and they establish the community that a few short centuries later will birth a woman named Mary, who gets a message from an angel, who births the child, the Christ. So this is the big picture, but how in the world do you get all those details together? Well, this is how you're going to do it. You are going to distill this down into 5 names. You can do it. Anyone can do 5 names, right? The first one is Adam. Say it back to me. Adam. First part of the story. Next is Noah. Noah. The third is Abraham. Abraham. The next is Moses. Moses. And the last one is David. David. There's your story. Now, anyone can memorize 5 characters and the 5 stories that go with those characters. We're going to memorize them. We're going to memorize them in order. Not only will you have memorized the outline of the biblical story, the history that goes with it, but as we will learn next session, you have also just memorized the outline of biblical theology. So let's review. What are your 3 areas? The 3 geographic regions that you're responsible to know, they are
Mesopotamia.
Excellent.
Egypt. Canaan. Israel. Palestine.
Perfect. And who are your 5 people? Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and David. You have just conquered real space and real time. And when we come back, we're going to deal with the concept of covenant. Thanks so much.
Well, now, did you think you were going to have that much information dumped on you tonight? It is a lot.
Oh, thank you.
It is a lot. But the timeline is something that you need to hold on to, because that's going to guide us through the rest of this study. Okay. Since we were supposed to remember them, let's recite as a group the 5 names. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses,
and
David. Very good. Very good. Now, has this discussion of these 5 people and the timeline helped you to better understand the story of the Old Testament? Or at least start to understand it? I don't know about you, but I do know that the Old Testament was one of the most confusing things I ever read. In fact, it was very easy when I entered into ministry to say, I'm a New Testament man. That's the only thing that really counts. Until I started studying the Old Testament. We spent, the school was based on quarters rather than semesters. And we spent the first quarter on history. We spent the second quarter on people and events. And we spent the third quarter on theology. And by the time the third quarter was over with, I said to myself, there is something here. And I've become a student of the Old Testament. And folks, I really want to encourage you. I know this is going to be some rough sledding, but this is most significant to your understanding not only of the biblical witness, but your understanding of what God's plan is all about. Because the New Testament really picks up on the time of Jesus and immediately afterwards. The Old Testament is people and problems and where people go off the course. And it's important to understand that. Now, I know that there are some people that are going to argue about the creation story, whether it was Earth is 10,000 years old or more, or 6,000 years old. You can go to the Creation Museum and find out that it's 6,000 as far as that's concerned. By the way, I highly recommend go there. It is one of the most fascinating things that we've ever done. You two have done. Pardon?
It's in Kentucky.
In Kentucky. Yeah. Yep. Right across the line.
Yeah.
Indiana.
Yeah.
West of Cincinnati.
It is absolutely remarkable.
Is that where
And-
the ark is?
Yes.
Yes,
That's-
well,
Down the road, they're not
There,
down
down the
there.
road.
40 miles
It's
apart.
hard, but
I've been to the Ark.
Yeah.
You can go to the-
Yeah, the Creation Museum, both of them, we did both, and it was a worthwhile kind of experience. Yeah, it is. So, you've got arguments about actual creation. Forget those arguments. That doesn't matter, because the ancients did not keep track of the creation events. They kept track of people and how the people played into the life around them. And that's exactly what God has done with the Old Testament. So hold on to that. Now, what would your response be if God called you, like he called Abraham, to move hundreds and thousands of miles away? Well, that's what I call an instant answer. And I respect that. But if God does that, what kind of questions are you going to come up with in your mind? What kind of anxieties are you going to have?
Where am I going?
How long do I have to stay?
Yep.
What
How
should
am I
I
gonna
wear?
Is it cold? Why?
am I gonna make a living?
Yeah. I mean, talk about anxiety. This has got to drive you absolutely crazy.
Who else
Yeah.
is there?
Exactly. I mean, for Sue and I, it was leaving Indiana and going to Atlanta. That was sort of a little bit of a trauma, but at least everybody spoke English. Sort of.
Little extra words there.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember when we went there. I was down in the southern part of Georgia visiting a church the president of the Mission Society, one of my big jobs is raise money. And met this woman down there. And she says, and where are you living? Are you living in Georgia? Well, of course, we moved to Georgia when we came to the Mission Society. Oh, and where in Georgia do you live? Well, we live just outside of Atlanta. Atlanta? That is not Georgia.
Okay then.
The Civil War was still going on.
Okay.
War of Northern aggression.
That's right. That's right. But let's be honest. When we make these kinds of moves, it's not easy. It really isn't easy. You ever experience a move like that?
You ever experienced a move like that and you don't know what?
I took my family from Southern California to upstate New York.
Well, there's a difference. Yeah. Yeah.
Cultural shock. There you go.
Yeah. Goodness gracious. What's that white stuff on the ground, Father?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get used to it.
Uh-huh.
When's summer going to be? July 4th.
Yeah. One day. That's all you get. But, can you put yourself in that mindset? All of the anxiety?
We did that, exactly.
Yeah. Did you go through something like
When
that?
we retired, we sold everything we had, kept our motor home and our car and our boat. And we headed south. We had no idea where we were going, where we were going to stop. We had no plan. We just drove. So we were pioneers.
There you go. There you go. One of the stories in Sue's family that I remember the most is her mom and dad were farmers in Indiana, but they would come south after retirement and stay. And they had a little trailer. And one year, the youngest of the boys, who was still older than Sue, Boyd, drove them down. And they just got across the state line into Florida, and they stopped there to go to the restroom. And they got in the restroom, and Dad was in one stall, and Boyd was in another stall. And you had to understand my father-in-law. He never met a stranger. Never met a stranger. And there he is, sitting on the toilet.
And he doesn't know Boyd's there.
And he doesn't know where Boyd is. He doesn't know that Boyd's there. And he's saying, well, my son just brought us down from Indiana, and we've been driving for several hours now. And it's going on and on and on. And all of a sudden, this voice comes from Boyd over the star. Dad, I know. I'm sitting here. But you see, it's that difference. It gets to you after a while, That's what's going on here. The story in the Old Testament is really a story of differences and of different locations and how people have developed in different ways and how God had a plan for what his people should be like. And his people, based on where they were at, decided there were some better things that they could do. And they figured it out their own way. Now, do you think we do that today?
Yes.
We sure do, don't we? We've got this all figured out. And God says, why don't you just hold off here for a minute? I've got something you need to hear. And I think that's our importance of doing a study like this, is to hear and find out where we fit into the storyline, because this is not a remote thing. This is really our history. This is the history that the church, Christianity, is built upon. And it's our history. Even though we don't want to think about it that way, or, Well, Moses sent 12 spies into Canaan to try to get the lay of the land. And 10 of them came back and said, you don't want to go there. 2 of them came back and said, wait a minute, maybe we do. And the distinction here is that fear keeps us from doing what God wants to be done. And as we continue with this study you're going to find more and more times of where fear has intervened in God's plans. It's easier for me to solve the problem than to rely on God. Because actually, I'm boots on the ground. I should know. But guess what? God is the one who knows. So we're leading now into that nice period of history. Somebody got a Bible with them? Do me a favor. Go to Psalm 46 and read the first 3 verses. And I got a Bible with me too if you didn't have one. But. Psalm 46, verses 1 through 3.
I don't have it. Somebody else have it?
Okay, Jim's got it. Go ahead,
God
Jim.
is our refuge and strength, and ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. Though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging.
That's God's answer to fear. Fear is not of God. Fear is of uncertainty when we are committed to following courses of action determined by ourselves.
There's a song out by Zach Williams that says fear is a liar.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. You got any fears tonight? Anything that's really not too certain about? Ron, you had to overcome some today, didn't you?
I did, yeah. It just, that was, I don't know if I go as far as fear, but it was certainly anxiety.
Yeah.
What to do, what not to do. It wasn't the first time either. We went through the same thing when we moved to Florida to plant the first church we did. Kind of an anxious time then too.
I'll tell you, I was quite fearful about starting this. I wasn't certain that we were going to get done in time to start when the time that we wanted to do. I was afraid that we weren't going to have enough people. But got to put those fears away. If you're walking on God's timeline, doing God's business, things are going to get taken care of. Most people would say that's a cockeyed optimist. I would say that's a disciple, to be able to do that. I want you to think for a moment if there's something on your heart for which you would like prayer. Maybe something that this week's study has brought to light. If you want to speak it so we can pray to it, if you want to just hold it into yourself, well, you can pray during a silent time. But now's the time to take a look at fear in our lives and say, get out of here. Get out of here. Uncertainty is not fear. Uncertainty is still collecting data. But fear is what leads to being paralyzed and not doing. Anybody want to share anything? And you don't have to. I don't want to force you into anything. Then let's take a few minutes and each one of us pray about what it might be in our own life that we're still afraid of. Let's pray. Father God, we come before you as your children. We come before you acknowledging that we haven't got the answers to everything. At times we're afraid because we don't. But God, look into our hearts and give us encouragement. Let us know that no matter what comes our way in life, you are there. And we can trust you. And we can follow you. I ask your blessings on this group here tonight, Father. This has been a confusing study. And yet it's beginning to open up some things that we all need to be opened up to. I ask you to be with this church and with all of its new members. God, lead us and guide us. Turn us into a body of believers that are not just sitting still, but are moving to do your work. Bless us now, Father, in your Son's name. Amen. Amen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate doing this.
Housekeeping.
Housekeeping. Oh, yes. We have a small problem. And the small problem has to do that before this church was even a glimpse on the horizon, we bought some tickets to see the Kingston Trio a week from tonight. And so,
Can we still go, please?
can we go?
Well, I thought you wanted to give them to someone.
No.
Getting the map out, figure out where they were.
Yeah, there. We got a couple of options. We can say we're going to take a week off, or I can give them material and they can come in and lead this. What would you like to see happen?
I'd say take a week off.
Take a week off?
Yep.
We all in agreement on that subject? All righty then. We will get together.
You can go see your Kingston Trio.
If you want to.
Probably.
Is the streaming still on, Ron?
Yes, yes.
Still on?
Yes.
Yes. So this video will not be on next week. Thank you so much, everybody.
Good morning. Has it been a long night? Maybe been a long year, maybe been a hard life, maybe you're not alright. If you got a little red in your eye, you come to the right place. People like you, people like me, this is where we all find grace. Come on now. Bet you wanna sing hallelujah. Bet you said amen. Can't help but celebrate being born again. Somebody who loves you is waiting at the door. It's home sweet home here in the house of the Lord. Take a load out, you're about to find